Stony, the road we trod, across the sands of time, through turbulent waves, from the bellies of beasts to underground railroads, migration from Selma bridges to Darfur highways, from streets where we march to beats that move us, from the fire of protest to the fire of celebration, of carnival, of junkanoo, of festival, anting anting. If we can't walk, we run. If we can't run, we fly. We make a way to make our way. From hashtags to hand drums, from live streams to living rooms, from Lagos streets to London blocks, to every corner we claim as home. Every step, a link. Every link, a lifeline. Everywhere we go, there we are, as we've always been.
Latin community of Portobello, Panama, who call themselves and the Caribbean performance tradition Congo. Tosha holds an advanced degree from Howard University in art history with a focus on contemporary art and specialization in American and African diaspora arts. She lives in Florida, where she learned about the work of diving with a purpose, an international nonprofit that trains Black scuba divers to assist in the documentation of underwater culturally and environmentally important sites. The African and African American diaspora isn't only about the slave trade, it is rooted in transatlantic and trans-Pacific belonging. Her interest in diving was the result of a summer program through Spelman College, where she studied nature, art, and snorkeled. The experience taught her the connections between environmental responsibility and the environment. This new perspective began to inform her of her own work. And so I will now turn it over to our speakers. Thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you. A special thank you to Adama and to all of you all who have joined us today. I want to start, we're going to kind of go back and forth in an organic conversation. We'll ask each other questions and we'll kind of expand on some of those. And one of the things I wanted to start with you, Tosha, is talk about the connection between what the earth knows, the water knows that you engaged within Portobello. How did that work, that listening, memory work, sense of archive, how does that connect to your work in terms of art and archival practices?
Thank you, everyone, for being here and being a part of this moment. Hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to see the show that's in there, when we stop, we would love to take some questions in there and talk about the cross-pollinations. To answer Renee's question, I think it comes to breathing and also to slowing down. And I think about having met Arturo in the mid-1990s and going to Portobello the next year. That vibration is about slowing down, but there's also a thing about breathing the air and drinking the water that really helps you sort of really materialize and also like get into like the molecular granular being that's there. It's a very magical place. It's very hard to explain and put into words. But if you've ever been somewhere that like it felt very much at home the first time that you were there, there's something about the history, and it is a literal and a metaphoric crossroads of culture, of foodways, of being. And it's really a place that time really slows down. Like you're an hour and a half from Panama City, which is one of the like busiest international hubs on the planet. And then you're on this coast and things feel tranquil and connected in a very different way. So as an artist, having an opportunity to work there and snorkel there a decade later offered me an opportunity to barter working on a film that was on the maroon culture and the history there. But as a part of that, I ended up deepening yoga practice and scuba diving. So I'm actually just coming back from what might be my third or fourth time having an opportunity to be under the water there. And so that real sense of breathing and belonging and understanding that what the people know, it's like the rocks under the water are like their own magical landscape that also holds that memory. There are anchors and chains that remain under that water that stopped ships that held people who came there for commerce, trade, and still, you know, their descendants reside there. So I could just say that breathing and the water are like two very palpable senses that I feel like I've carried with me for the nearly 30 years since the first time visiting there.
You know, I love that you started from this place of slowing down and a different relationship to time. When we met each other in Portobello at the same time that we met Oronike Odeleye, who co-founded Creative Currents. We were all there together at a time where we had floppy disk, and if you wanted to send an email off, if you wanted to email family, you either needed to compose all your emails on your computer, then save them to the disk, then either pay $2 an hour when there finally was an internet cafe in the community, or take a bus 2 hours or take a bus an hour to Sabanitas to open up the stuff on your floppy disk and send it off in your emails right away and then go back home. So that means that we didn't have television in the houses. They had television in the community, but we didn't have a television in the house we stayed in. We had each other. And we had long meals and conversation. One of the reasons we titled the exhibition Panatcones, Paintbrushes, and Power is because so much of the deep conversation, the getting to know each other, the connections between our being and practices was around a picnic table outside with these long conversations. A part of that slowing down and trajectory too, for me, I had been doing interviews in the community focused around what does Congo performance mean? What does carnival mean? And I had been collecting all of these kind of recordings over time. And as the years passed, so did some of the community members. And I ended up having their voices and memories on tape, and their families needed those. And I think part of the way it attuned me, at the same time that was happening in my work practice, my father was experiencing Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we talk about is we have had experiences with Alzheimer's and dementia in our families, and that put a different spin on archival practices and memory and urgency. And I think for me, I really shifted toward how it ramped up a sense of urgency in recording people's stories, slowing down and paying attention. I think when I first came, it took my body and my graduate student being who was used to in the way time and schedules need to go. It took me a while not to look at practices of eating as a waste of time. A part of that feels really embarrassing to say, because of course those, at a certain point in my life, it was clear that those meal times mattered. I have a dear mentor, Dwight Conquergood, who believed in the power of slowing down and eating and food and the way it opens us up to each other. But knowing that things could be lost, watching, knowing that I was holding people's memories, and I wish someone had recorded my father early on, it shifted my sense of archival practice. And I wanted to know, from a personal standpoint, as you have been thinking about family, memory and kind of dealing with some of these issues around memory and the possibility of loss, how did that impact your practices as your various archival practices?
Yes. Okay. So there's like 4 different trains of thought right there.
Because I asked such a
where's
short
the
question.
I was like, okay, which question am I going to focus on first? And now I will challenge my own memory. So there was something that, like you said, and thinking about the village, and also thinking about this experience. Like if you think that the world is a very big place, it is, but there are only like 4 people in it. And then I have actually a folklorist friend who says the rest is done with smoke and mirrors. So the idea is that, how many people I met in Portobello and then find out that they are connected. Like with Renee has a very deep connection through her sister-in-law, who is best friends with my cousin who babysat her son. Right?
We didn't know,
and we didn't
know
know until we started all of this, but that was like a parallel line in our relationship that was drawn through other people connected to us that we found out later. And so there are all kinds of things like that are like geography and positioning. And then there's belief. So it's a very devout place. And there's an aspect of my work that is about like performance of ritual and ritual practice, and looking at that throughout the Caribbean basin. So then I took a detour from graduate study to help my mom, who was dealing with multiple illnesses, from aortic aneurysm and quintuple bypass surgery to also memory loss, dementia, like the onset of a number of things that when you are in that kind of experience with someone, like it's almost like you feel like there are little bits of them that are disappearing every day. And so I think about how being in the village and dealing with people who are also processing loss, but are very close to their traditions. So there's a church in the village called well, it's the Jesus Nazareno is the saint in the village, and the saint's day there is actually Tuesday. So we're doing right before there. And so people will walk from Panama City or Sabanitas or various points to show their devotion, ask for miracles, to pray for something, to give thanks for something. And so in terms of what you were saying about food and a simple meal or a memory or just a remembrance, you know, it's actually a very powerful place to get into that ritual. There's going to be someone in that space, whether there's mass happening or not. And so I think about like over time how, you know, there are things that are actually punctuated. Like I asked for something. I went back and I was thankful for something. I remember being there when a person passed, and that was a place I could offer, or the ocean. So, you know, it's human life is precious. You know, every moment is precious. And sometimes the best thing that you can do, you may not be able to fix a situation, but you can be present with. And sometimes that stillness to be present with is important. And then as time passes, I say, okay, from this experience, I want to remember some of these things just so that in my time of need, I know how to ask for things myself, like being a witness until the point where it's your turn.
One of the things I'm curious about, and I've never kind of asked you outright, is for you, what is the relationship between art, when you're art making and archives, versus because you wear two hats. You wear multiple hats, but the two that I'm going to uplift right now are your art, your practices as an art maker, and your practices as a preservationist, right? A person who preserves art. And part of what I'm curious about in a really kind of open way is, how do you think about your relationship to art and archive and the making process? And how does that shift for you when you think about your work as a preservationist?
So right now, I feel like all of the things that I'm well trained in, and that might be like African diasporic culture or like just color and like the color and contours of culture, creativity, and the ocean are all endangered. So all of my work, you know, seems to hinge upon that, and it feels like it's important. So a lot of those cultures have relied upon visual traditions or oral histories, and you know, you will find places where people don't even necessarily trust what's written down. You had to remember it, or in certain circles you're not allowed to write, you only get what you can remember. So if we can still ourselves, we can remember more. But then it is also important to have material culture. Like we are kind of at the end of books, and trained as an art historian, I love books. I am a coffee table book person, books, vinyl, records. I'm like, oh, how is it that everything I love is either heavy or fragile? You know, so like coming to terms with the idea of digital storage, because that's a light and fluid way. If you have Wi-Fi and you're on grid and you're plugged in and your phone didn't die, and then there's books that you can't carry. So, you know, I feel like art is about record and memory. I think about, how do we store things so that in 300 years, if we get 300 years, what will people think if we are still people? What will the whales think, you know, about what we did today? And so with that, I think it's important to store everything in multiple, like backup hard drives, like you are your own backup hard drive. and then there's a digital hard drive, and then there is note taking, and then there is conversation, because it may be that what we remember might be what we share today. 5 years from now, something will happen, and something that happened in this room will be significant. Or we're sitting here now and something that happened 5 years ago will be significant. So in some way, everything does matter.
One of the things I'm going to ask you to think about, and I'll share a story in the same line, is a moment where your art practice, you were consciously or unconsciously using art practice as a way to listen deeply, to pay attention in Portobello, and any kind of revelation that might have come from that moment. And as I'm asking you that, I have a couple of them, but the one that I'll uplift that bubbles up for me, I lived in Portobello in 2003 on a Fulbright. And at the time, I had done a couple of Spanish immersion programs. I had studied French before finding out that I was really attached to Portobello and wanted to be there, dwell there, learn there. And so I had to shift gears and learn Spanish. And some of that learning happened in community. And Tasha and I were talking a little bit earlier about the fact that when I was early in community, I'm also trained in dance. So I would dance because I couldn't talk, but I could be with people body to body, and we could dance and we could do that. And after being there a bit, the exhibition really is pulling on artists that come from, the workshop community in Portobello. The spaces we stayed were all in a compound around this workshop space. So we're moving with each other, interacting, all the time. Well, when I was living there, there were times I would go, I'm not a person who was trained as a visual artist. I'm a poet, I'm a creative writer, and a scholar. But I would go into the space, and who doesn't like playing with paint? Like, paint's great. So I would go in, and if there was some extra paint and extra canvas, I would sit and dwell. And part of that sitting and dwelling helped me slow down and helped me be witness to conversations and moments that would not have happened otherwise. And it didn't matter whether I was I wasn't making art for anybody but myself. But the doing of it, someone would then give me technique advice. And then someone else would come into the space and have a conversation that might open up a new conversation about what Congo Carnival meant. And anybody who knows me well knows being still is really hard for me. I'm a mover. I need to be moving around. So I need some practice, something to do in stillness to be able to kind of slow down and dwell, and learning that and having those moments was really vital. And I keep looking up at Orenike because one of the things that I learned from Orenike, and I've told her this before, Orenike has a wonderful talent, many, but she can sit and dwell. So I would go sometimes on porches, on stoops and alleys, and I would sit and dwell with her. And learning that sense of stillness, and somebody asks you to go this place you've never been before, and you have this new revelation because you happen to be sitting where people were. That art practices and art making and relationship building helped me do that. How did art practices in Portobello help open up those kind of opportunities for you?
So in the art making, like if anybody remembers Harold and the Purple Crayon, like Harold has the crayon and it's like you're kind of making your world with art. It's been some time since I've had a painting studio, but I remember very fondly like those years going and like really taking that time to go have a studio practice. And that studio practice being very close to water, and even thinking about the interdisciplinary relationship that Janeka and Sandra and Arturo, as founders of the art colony, Janeka turning the performance tradition with his family into a visual art tradition, Arturo as a painter and a performer. So there's all of these like sort of intersectionalities in their practices that I think shape what they shared with us. And then Sandra is a photographer and also a great dweller and documenter. So I think about taking a break with Arturo and an artist named Torquase Dyson, who was in residence that summer. And we snorkeled. And I remember following this blue-green fish to the edge of where we could follow this blue-green fish. And that impulse helped diving, because I was like, I want to spend more time going where that fish goes. And last week I saw that fish and some of his cousins, her cousins, their cousins. And there's something about like informing the practice and also thinking about documenting, because the idea is that, you know, we're familiar with the streets that we move on or where we live, and fish actually live places. You know, the underwater landscape is not random. And from diving in the same place at the same time of day, there's a little yellow puffer fish, and that they're cleaning their front step, trying to find a lady pufferfish friend. And the day at 4 o'clock that you swim by that place and you don't see them, you know, they're nesting. And so, like, I think there's something about like the understanding that the bottom, like what you don't see below the surface, is actually not random. And following a guide through these networks and channels that were very much like, you know, the Grand Canyon, like there's this magical world. And I was like looking at the mountains around me and I was like, oh, it continues just underwater. And so like in that thing, you know, it feels like the ocean and has started speaking to me in ways that I'm saying that out loud right now. But there are people that are like, okay, you know, like, but that attunement. And I think in Portobello and in other places on the planet, like just being able to show up and adapt to the rhythm of what is there, like Atlanta has its rhythm, and then New York has its rhythm. And it's like you change codes, you switch to understand Shanghai has its rhythm. You know, everything has a pace, and the ability to adapt one's rhythm to being sensitive to that allows you to experience more of what's going on in a place and take that bit with you to the next place in community with each other.
I want to talk about this exhibition as its own kind of archival practice and its own work of kind of memory and community. And I know some of the impetus I had in kind of pulling things together, and I'll speak on that in a second. But I wanted to ask either what were some of your, as you were jumping into this project, you know, what were some of your goals, or what were some of your goals and hopes, or things you learned along the way that opened up, you know, more possibilities?
A lot of time has passed and these places are connected. So it's actually very nice in this show to see the connectivities between the ritual relationships, like the carnival costumes. And then also, so there are people in the show who repeat, like Ariel and Jamaica. So you get to see Ariel Jimenez as the pajarito, which is a very significant Congo carnival character. But then you get to see Ariel as a painter. And Ariel is also a diver. And so there's a connectivity between the artist, the performer, and the person. And I think, you know, that's something that trying to pull out those relationships. And if the show would be up another 4 months, then we would have had time to put together what I loved the idea of, like maybe a finder's guide, like where are the octopus in here? You know, because it's in Sandra's work, it's in Gustavo's work, Ashley's representation of Yaneka, like Yaneka as a painter, Yaneka and his family. So there's like all of these like connected, like Legos or Tetris. Like it just feels like trying to make those relationships spatial, and even choosing to put Tracy's representation of the bay on the front wall on that blue that Fahamu found that's kind of like the water. so that in this little slice of Atlanta, if you have a moment to go into the show and feel like you're breathing the air and drinking the water, and if you came for the opening, you might have gotten a Panatcone. So it's like those things that try to transport someone to a space where these meaningful experiences are happening.
Thank you for that. And for me, part of the desire was having, you attended the artist retreat in 1997. It started in 1995. You were part of the second cohort, right?
Yeah, so
second or
we'll
third?
have to forensics on our timeline.
So our timeline's a little fuzzy.
But like, because and that's funny because it's also real, but it's like I know that Arturo went with students, Michelle Lanier, Lindsay, whose last name I don't remember, Amy Sherald, and Khalida Rawls. And so they were group one of the magical experience. Arturo and I have a mutual friend, Dottie Green in DC. They were theater people in Connecticut. And Dottie was like, you've got to meet Arturo. He's taking his students to Panama. I was like, okay, I'm not a student, but where do I sign up? You know, it was like the birth of the side gig. I was framing art at night to try to afford the time to take this month, you know. So it's like 3 jobs because I got to go do this. And so I went with his student, Anna Kayla Ritford, in the second year, 96, 7. And then And then I went with a friend's sister. I took her back. I was like, you got to go. And then over time, you know, just like this is an experience that must be had. There's artist Indira Bailey who's in the show that I knew from New York, and then she went, you know, so it's just like how we kind of puzzled it all together.
And you and I were there between 2000 or 2001. At the same time, we met Renée. And part of the desire for the show, there's so many artists that you'll witness in this show that you would see in solo shows or you would see outside of this context. And you might not know the conversation they're having with each other through art or the conversation they've had with each other through relationship, through their lives. And getting to be a part of this, I went the first time in 2020, 2021, and I kept on going. I didn't stop until I had my son, and then went back as soon as I could. So I've seen these relationships over time, and I had a keen sense that there was a feeling at a moment, this will last forever. This is just the way it's going to be. But then it wasn't. And the feeling, when I realized it wasn't going to last forever, the specialness of the moment for these African descendant artists from the US and Panama to get to come together for 3 weeks, you know, largely African American artists. There were artists from multiple backgrounds who participated in this. But I was thinking about what it meant for African descendant artists in the US to get to leave a US, you know, the construct of the US and the context of the US, racism and race as we understand it and move through it in the US, and be in a different diasporic space. And what that meant for our lives, what that meant for the conversations we were having around those tables with Afro-Panamanian artists. And wanting to, as life happens, and, you know, we don't get to be here forever. And the retreats don't last forever, but wanting a space that held us all, that held some of the ways that made some of the representations of what that time meant. Wanting something to hold that together was part of the impetus, you know, for this. And I love that you're mentioning some of what we discovered. So the call, you know, that we made about it was really a set of questions. What did this mean for your life? What did it mean for these, you know, African diaspora artists to come together in this space? How did it make us think about our different national identities, our racialized identities, our sense of mobility, self, and power? But we don't, you know, you never know what people will share in responding to that. And I love that you talked about people how often if you have not yet gotten a chance to walk through, I'm excited, for you to do that after, how often they're representing each other. So you have, as you mentioned, Ashley Minner, who's representing Gustavo Esquina, and other artists whose work is in the show. Sharon Barnes, who has a piece that really reflects on Arturo Lindsay and Yaneka Esquina. So how often when we put out the call, people could share anything, and a lot of what they were sharing were looking at each other, and I just think there's something there. Yeah.
And there's also like there's a real authenticity of relationship and like a simplicity and an appreciation for that, like being able to show up and have tea, being able to have a town that's like small enough that everybody recognizes everyone's children. And so just a couple weeks ago, seeing like a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old walking down the street supporting each other, holding hands, and like actually being safe, being able to do that, like that is a kind of timeless freedom. Like you can walk around barefoot, and just being able to offer children that kind of safety and support. So like that familiarity, or being able to call someone and know that they're going to be available to see you the next day rather than you have to schedule for next month, so there's that sort of, I really appreciate that. And converting with the underwater practice, like the photography into underwater photography and studying that landscape in a different way, and wanting to be a more efficient breather so I can stay down there longer and be with the fish, and then offer them the support that we haven't all totally lost our minds up here and forgotten that it's an ecosystem. It doesn't matter whether you can see it or not. It's kind of all connected. So, there's something that between the show and the goals of the continuities and the stability of the Taller going into next generations. I appreciate that after, like you said, it doesn't last forever, so you have these intervals and these chapters and verses. I appreciate that I've actually spent more time in Panama and Atlanta in the last 5 months than I've spent at home. So they're different homes, different hats, but yeah, like you pull forward what you can where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to have the opportunity to really open it up to you all and invite you into the conversation, hear your questions or comments. Hi.
First off, this conversation has been so beautiful, and you sound like a mermaid, and I really appreciate that. I was going to ask, because you both speak so highly of this space, how has these experiences influenced your spiritual practices? Like, was it transformative? Like, were you already in this same like line of thinking prior to being in these experiences, or did it happen as time moved on and being there more often?
Thank you for that question. It's funny, we were having a conversation in some ways about that this morning. So do you want to respond to this?
Go first.
I will say that, yeah, it was transformative. I grew up in a family in a Presbyterian church. I went to Catholic school because they had good after school care from K through 12, and Portobello is anchored by a Catholic church, but there is also a wonderful porousness around multiple spiritual practices. And there's an awareness of, you used the phrase earlier today, moments that the veil between spaces feels thinner. So you can have these kind of religious practices, but you can also have a felt sense of energy and a sense of ancestor, a sense of there's something going on here that I don't know what it is, but I'm going to respect it. The energy here says, don't come in there. I am not going to go in there, or it opened me up to a greater comfort with what I don't know and being comfortable with what I don't know. And so one of the stories I was sharing with Tasha earlier today is that people people in the community would sometimes you'd have conversations and you'd mention something odd that you saw. Like I saw the hint of this. I think it was a person walking. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's so and so. She always walks that way at this point of day." And you'd be like, "Okay, well, what's her name?" Or, "Oh, she died so and so and so, but she's always walking out there." Okay. Uh, but there was a moment that felt scary. There was a moment that felt like I am not from here. I want to make sure to move with the spirit of graciousness and gratitude, but I'm not from here. And there was some shift. I can't tell you what. I think time and awareness helped with the shift. That I just became more open for multiple realities at one time. And the way that benefited me in my personal life is when my father passed away. I was telling Tosha earlier, there was a cardinal who would visit all the time at my windows, and I mean, in ways that were easy to see me through the window, but also there was this hedge near the bay window at the front of my house, and the cardinal would fly behind the hedge to get to the window where I was. And I had the sense like that feels like my dad. And who I don't care if that's true or not. It felt true, and so it is to me. And that's, I think, an acceptance that being in that space and being with people who there did not seem to be a judgment about the multiplicity of realities, and being just was what it was, and that was helpful.
I'm gonna try to think about which story to tell, but like I think you've exposed me. Like I feel like I've been becoming a professional mermaid most of my life. Like come by it honest. And that, I mean, my parents like to drive, so we spent a lot of time on the road going places. So I feel like that wanderlust was deeply ingrained, both spiritual, in their own different ways. But I was telling Renee earlier about the summer I learned how to swim in the ocean and how that connected to snorkeling later, and now spending time diving and diving with a purpose. 10 years old up, like we can train people to be a part of that experience. So if that sounds like something that you may be interested in after this, I would love to plug you into that network, even if you don't know how to swim now. But there's certain spaces, like I think about authenticity as being like if somebody is sitting on the stoop braiding somebody's hair, real life is happening in that space. Like that's always something that I felt connected to, and I've seen in different landscapes and different languages, and it always makes me feel home. But also I feel like maybe I've always lived in a house that had a spirit there, not an intranquil spirit, but like something that if you're aware of it, you could smell baking bread and there's no bread baking, or there's a chair that's moved just so that or that air that might be a little bit colder than the other air around it. And Portobello is very much connected to that history. Not all of it is positive. There is a self-liberated African spirit there that aligned with pirates and I like being in that water too. I was like, I want to, it's like I think that there is something there that also feels less complicit and less complacent, because it's very palpable and present. So being able to connect through the veil, to connect it to the creativity, and to connect it to community, is something that is particularly important right now. The earth has seen lots of times, and we can document it, or the stories could be erased. And so again, it's like how we share memory and tell these stories, and what we do together. And revolution happens one at a time, one conversation. It doesn't have to be a whole room. And so, like, just feeling like no matter how out of sorts it may feel in a moment, pushing through that discomfort could be a revelation that not just serves you, but can help you serve someone else.
I also want to bring, the brilliant photographer and revolutionary spirit, Sandra Aleta, into this conversation, because all of the houses that we were staying in and the space of the Congo workshop is really, owned and curated by Sandra. And Sandra is a person who is reading in at least 2 languages, is reading, mysticism, philosophy, Buddhism, and inviting, loves having multiple people around a table. So a very short story that bubbled up for me about that means that not only are we having those conversations, but we're interacting with people from so many different kind of worldviews and belief systems. And one of my favorite memories, my parents came to visit me in 2003. My dad was born in 1928. My mother was born in 1932, and it was my mother's first passport. And they came to visit me in Portobello. And while we were there, one of the people who was staying with Sandra was a Buddhist monk. My dad didn't speak Spanish. The Buddhist monk, I'm not sure. I don't know which languages he was speaking, but he was very quiet when he was at, the table, and we're all sitting there together. And what's behind us is a portrait of the Black Christ figure, El Nazareno, that you're mentioning. And my father attributes those kinds of paintings to Catholicism. And as a person who was, raised Presbyterian and Protestant, really kind of suspicious about all of these different paintings and, what he sees as idols and things. So the conversations going on, conversations about the Black Christ, the conversation's kind of Spanglish, tuning in and tuning out, but feeling a little suspicious. And noticing that the monk beside him doesn't really know he's a monk, but know that he's not responding either. And there's a certain point when people are starting to move away from the table and they're going to do other things. And I'm still sitting there, and my dad looks at the monk and he was like, I know you're a little suspicious about this too. I noticed you're not saying anything either. You must be Presbyterian. Like, so opening to a number of different worldviews. Thank you for that. Are there other questions? Hi, Sydney Williams.
So I just kind of was taking some notes of some things that I connected with. First, obviously, is ritual, as both of you guys reiterated, caring for aging parents. So obviously this exhibit and some of the artwork is special to me because some of the artwork is based on me and my sister and my mom, who passed away when we were children due to breast cancer. So very happy for y'all to be able to witness this artwork. And then I also am a little bit of a writer. So just about like memory and record, those things are very important to me. Even more now that my memory has been impacted by, I recently had brain surgery in February. So where the tumor was located, like my short-term memory was very much impacted. Fortunately, not my long-term memory, so I can still write and remember things from years ago. I just might forget what breakfast I had yesterday. So But yes, and just like y'all said, keeping that record and just wishing that my mom had the opportunity to write more. I do luckily have some of her journals. She was also a writer and an artist, and she crocheted, which I do as well. But yeah, it's just wishing that she was able to write more and took more pictures, because I only had, up until I was 6 years old, those memories of her, which I always say that I feel lucky that at least I was retaining memories. When she died, my sister, who is 3 years younger than me, wasn't so lucky. So, but yeah, and then just digital storage versus books. So I have, a writing website where I've been hosting a lot of, just childhood writings, poems, even some promotion materials for this exhibit, and then books, because I've always loved to journal. I think like one of my first books that I ever wrote was in second grade. I wrote this little like paper book. I was so proud of it. I got to read it in front of my class. So yeah, just like that digital storage versus books, because you only have a certain amount of gigabytes that you can have in these websites and things like that. But it's not always practical, I think, to have that physical storage for like journaling and books. But yeah, so just really connected with all of that, especially when Miss Grantham was talking about being your own backup hard drive, because yeah, I have my website, which is one of them, and then journals, which is another. So thank you all so much for, sharing your wisdom. And I'm really excited to be able to ask more questions when we're able to go in the exhibit. Thank you guys
so much, Sydney. And I'm glad you mentioned these multiple ways of storing, writing in journals, having something, because when the grid goes down, right? So you have something on the side, you have something, saved on a web. You have these multiple ways of saving. So thank you. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
So we'll do one more questions because I want to make sure everybody has time to check out the exhibit.
Perfect.
If that's
Yeah.
okay. So
Wait, don't give up on your question.
By the way, this is Michelle Lanier, who was in the first group of students to go to the art colony, and who is how I ended up going down, because she said, hey, you need to go. Do you know Arturo Lindsay? You need to go to the art colony. So hi.
Good afternoon. My name is Atiba. And while I was standing in line, I just realized that, my friend Claude is here from DC. We met back in the 70s. And I was telling him I had a fire, 98. And so a lot of the stuff from our era, I didn't have anymore. And just thinking about the balance between digital pictures in particular and the hard copies, made me realize you're right. We have to do both as part of that archive. But I was going to say, I don't know if any of you took classes with Tina McElroy answer, or have been to the Heritage Festival at Sapelo Island, where last year about this time, they held it and 9 others died. And so it just made me think about, this work that's been happening in Panama. Is it happening in other places like a Sapelo Island that's for the mainland here? It's what's comparable. Is that happening in other places?
Thank you for that question, Julie.
So, I feel like I had the experience of witnessing communities preserving their traditions, like Sapelo and the Low Country. It definitely has different points of preserving tradition. I could pull out, like if we take a breakout group, I could share with you some of the things I know from that area. With Diving with a Purpose, we're also doing work in Barbados and Costa Rica and Honduras. And I've done some work in Brazil where, people are, trying to maintain and preserve longstanding traditions. So you want to take a breakout group? Yes, I feel like it's connected. And DC, DC is a massive epicenter of cultural heritage. Detroit. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are no, sadly, I don't have them at the front of my brain, but I know that there are a number of different kinds of kind of artist retreats and artist moments that bring folk together. As a writer, I'm more attuned to things like Baldwin for the Arts that's happening. There is, oh, can I bring it up? I can't right now. I'm going to look at you for a second, Michelle. This is a space in New Jersey that is founded by two women. One is a Caribbean chef, and the other is an educator. And they've been offering kind of writer and artist retreat moments. So there's several throughout the U.S., and then there's several in the Caribbean and on the continent. And I want all of them archived because they just the people who come together for them form this intergenerational power, and the conversations they have are so precious. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Ella. I'm a arts administration master's student, and I came in a little late, so apologies if you've already spoken about this, but I'm just interested in the African Diaspora Art Museum as an institution, and how it began and how you guys ended up in this gallery space. I'm wondering if there's any other public programming that you guys offer.
So you have a board member close by, but I will start and just give a nugget of that, which is a story. Fahamu Peku, who is the founder of ADAMA, shares. He talks about how he writes a little bit about this in the catalog that accompanies. Who writes about this in the catalog that accompanies the exhibition. So the catalog, is available if you're interested in it. It includes everyone's bio, artist statements, the artwork. But he talks about how going to Portobello and being part of these conversations and these artist retreat moments really sparked in him a sense of agency and desire to create ADAMA, that ADAMA in some ways is routed through Portobello in terms of the acts of creation. And I'm going to let the great board members and staff members tell you more about all the programming and yeah.
Well, I'm just going to close it out. Okay. See you after. Renee and Tosha, thank you both so much for an amazing conversation, for bringing Panatcones, paintbrushes, and powers to us. Big thank you to our guests for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. The energy that you brought and the smiles and the conversation and the affirmation of the things were being shared. And at the very beginning, as soon as you talked about breathing and slowing down, I thought about the shirt I had on. I was like, oh, how appropriate. But we really appreciate moments just like this. And we hope that you appreciate ADAMA, African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta. This exhibit comes down November 2nd after the Art Salon. So we hope that you have some time to spend with it today, but then come back and see us because we're here. Beyond that, our next exhibit opens November 14th, and it will feature some of the collection of Miss C.C.H. Pounder, Brother. And so there are some pamphlets around. Please take those cards with you. Please come back and see us for that. This programming is made available based on contributions from individuals as well as grants and sponsorships that we have. And so if you so desire, please feel free to donate here. But also follow us and share. So Instagram is ADAMA_ATL. If you're not following us, please do. And last but certainly not least, visit our website, www.adamatl.org, to see more about what we're doing and what we have in store. But again, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And we hope to see you again soon.